tranquilo echa el miedo y a la pena.
Aloha, and welcome to Figments 2.0. I'm Dan Leaf. I go by Fig, fighter pilot nickname, and I'm restarting my Figments series of video blogs, podcasts, whatever you want to call it. Originally, I did over 60 episodes on ThinkTech Hawaii, but now I'm going to generate them myself and post them here on this YouTube channel. I hope you'll watch as I try to inform and entertain a bit on topics of my choosing. And today my choosing is North Korea. That's the topic, their recent satellite launch. It's the 26th of November, 2023. And earlier this week, they successfully launched a spy satellite. I'd like to talk about what's important with regard to that launch, what isn't important, and what it tells us about where we stand with North Korea. Now, here in late November of 2023, the headlines are very much focused on Israel-Gaza, Russia-Ukraine, China-Taiwan. Rightly so, those are all prickly situations to say the very least. But there's only one case where the threat of nuclear conflict is real and immediate, and that's the North Korea case. They've got the launch vehicles, they've got the warheads, and they've stated a willingness to preemptively use nuclear weapons. So we're one bad decision away from that. And this satellite launch should bring our attention back to that problem set, because we haven't solved it clearly. So what does it mean that they successfully launched a spy satellite on their third attempt? The satellite itself is of relatively little importance. Apparently it's being used to surveil things like our bases on Guam. But one satellite doesn't mean much in the broader North Korean espionage and spying capabilities, or what they know about U.S. and Republic of Korea military disposition or intent. So that's not that important. But what is important, first of all, is that getting it successfully into orbit marks another milestone for their launch capability. I used to be the Vice Commander of Air Force Space Command. I understand that the physics of space launch are still quite difficult. Every time North Korea advances a bit in that regard, they become a more credible nuclear threat. So they've done that with this launch. Secondly, and more importantly, they've demonstrated their continued willingness to flaunt the restrictions, the sanctions put on by UN Security Council resolutions. There have been a series of resolutions since 2006, when North Korea exploded their first nuclear weapon, that tell North Korea to stop doing that. And they haven't stopped doing that. And the various sanctions on trade and other international interaction apparently mean nothing to them. So the sanctions have failed. Not surprisingly, given that Russia and China have walked away from their commitment to support these sanctions. Our deterrence has also failed. We should take that from the fact that North Korea continues to do as they wish, unbothered, apparently, by the tough talk and the shows of force that the United States and the Republic of Korea have engaged in. There's been a lot of tough talk since the summits failed in 2018. It seems to be getting tougher now between the Biden and Yoon administrations. It's not working. Our aircraft carrier visits and our nuclear sub visits clearly haven't stopped North Korean misdeeds. So our deterrence isn't working. That should worry us. Now, another area where we're failing is in human rights. This coming week, on the 4th of December in Honolulu, there'll be a conference on North Korean human rights. And the attendees, I'm quite certain, by the way, I'll be one of them, will decry the abysmal record of the North Korean regime with regard to human rights. Rightly so. But what do all our pronouncements about the misdeeds in this regard of North Korea achieve? Thus far, nothing. I would challenge you to find a single instance where U.S. policy has bettered the life of a single North Korean. That's not a good thing. In fact, I was listening to a podcast on NK News yesterday where they interviewed Sumi Terry, who's the former U.S. Central Intelligence Agency analyst on North Korea, and now the producer of a documentary that'll be out in 2 days on the 28th of November called Beyond Utopia, chronicling the escape of some North Koreans from the repression of the North to freedom. Sounds like a remarkable video, and I'll watch it as soon as it's available. But in this, Sumi Terry, former CIA analyst, acknowledges that both our deterrence and our human rights efforts have failed. And she kind of hinted around that we have to do something different. But what? That's the question. What can we do different? I have a suggestion. Because we're not going to get anywhere on denuclearization, and North Korea is unwilling to talk about human rights, we have to find an area where we can make progress. That area is the resolution of the Korean War itself. North Korea invaded the South on 25 June 1950. I wasn't even born yet, and I'm an old man now. Yeah, on July 27th, 1953, when I was just a year old, almost, the armistice was signed. But the armistice didn't end the Korean War. It put a halt to the fighting with the intent, the stated intent, that there be continued negotiations for a full and lasting peace. Those negotiations haven't occurred and haven't borne fruit. Now, there were 3 attempts to do something about this. The first was at the Geneva Conference of 1954. That conference was supposed to resolve the unfinished business of peace on the Korean Peninsula and address the outcome of the First Indochina War. On the latter count, it failed because that led to the division of North and South Vietnam, and we all know the rest of that story. On the Korea matter, that quickly fell by the wayside because the participants could not agree on the standing of various parties with regard to making peace on the Korean Peninsula. Who had what seat at which table was an issue that couldn't be resolved, specifically with regard to the Soviet Union. And so nothing happened. The Korea matter fell into being a subset of the Cold War for the next 40 years, roughly. It was never a main point. The main point was to keep the Cold War cold, and the real focus was on the Cold War in Europe. Those of us who served in Korea, and I did from 1978 to 1980, and then again from 1995 to 1997, felt like the lesser included case that we were. We were not a priority. The real Cold War was elsewhere. So there were no serious efforts to end the war. Until 1994, when, not because of the Cold War, but because of the fall of the Soviet Union and the emerging North Korean nuclear ambitions, that an attempt was made in something called the Agreed Framework to address the nuclear issue and at the same time build some sort of lasting normal peace and relations between the U.S. and North Korea. That fell apart. Perhaps we'll do a later episode in detail on that. So that didn't happen. In 2018, in the first Trump-Kim summit in Singapore, the 2 leaders agreed that they would seek a normalization of our relations, which implies peace, a lasting peace. As we know, that also fell apart. But peace has never been the priority. Peace on the Korean Peninsula, in other words, ending this now 73-year-old war. That may sound like a technicality, but it's not, especially when we can't make progress on denuclearization or on human rights. Every conversation that starts with "we're still at war" is going to end with the fact that we're still at war, regardless of what issue is discussed. So we should make peace. But if we have the opportunity, we, the United States, and our government are not ready. Suppose President President Trump and Kim Jong-un had walked out of the Metropole Hotel in Hanoi after their second summit and said, okay, we're good. We're ready to make peace. The U.S. government would have been totally unprepared, and there would have been bureaucrats all over going, okay, how? Because we haven't put any effort into it. We need to do the preparatory work so that when peace becomes a possibility, we have some idea what to do. We have, I don't know how many U.S. government employees, but I'm sure that we could gather independents, Republicans, and Democrats and agree that there's a lot of stuff being done by our government that's of little value and spending a lot of taxpayer dollars. Nobody's job is it to resolve the Korean War. Now, we do have two special representatives, ambassadorial level posts for dealing with North Korea. One is the special representative on North Korea matters, and that, frankly, is largely about deterrence, sanctions, and maintaining the ROK-US alliance. We also have a special representative on North Korean human rights, and that's all about acknowledging just how bad the situation is in North Korea and that it's the government's fault. Okay, those are both important matters. We need a special representative on Korean War resolution who begins laying the groundwork with a team that doesn't have to be particularly big and a budget that doesn't have to be gargantuan, that lay the groundwork for peacemaking. And now what is that groundwork? Let's talk about simple things like boundaries. Right now, the two Koreas are divided by a military demarcation line. The transition from a military demarcation line with demilitarized zones on either side to a normal inter-Korean border is a big shift. The maritime boundaries on either coast are an aberration in modern times. They were set after the armistice was signed, and they are absolutely not consistent with the current state of international law and order regarding maritime boundaries. Those need to be normalized. By the way, got some news for you. North Korea would benefit from such normalization. Okay? This isn't about appeasement. It's about peace. It's not about concession. It's about doing the right thing and laying the groundwork for doing better on the Korean Peninsula. We still have unresolved matters on remains and missing in action, and there are some hard feelings to address. In fact, those hard feelings are so hard, they're the fundamental basis for North Korean regime legitimacy. The U.S. and our supposed puppets in South Korea are to blame for multiple atrocities, according to the North Korean government, during the hot part of the war from 1950 to 1953. Now, we can scoff at that and say that's baloney, but the truth is we did bomb North Korea to the point that 80% of all structures were destroyed, and there were millions of lives lost. Okay, that has to be addressed. We have to go through a reconciliation process. And there's plenty on the North Korean side to be accounted for in the normal process that we go through when we resolve conflicts, as we have been and are still doing with Vietnam. And Vietnam should be a case in point. They're now a hugely important partner in U.S. security matters in the Indo-Asia Pacific, and a friend. And there's a lot of goodwill between the two countries. It's the opposite of the case with North Korea, even though the conflict and the killing and the dying and the destruction are far more recent. We have to get there with North Korea. Now, making peace, getting a peace treaty that ends the Korean War formally, would not be the panacea. It wouldn't be the magic wand that is waved and all the problems disappear. It isn't even step one. It's a step zero. It's a start, because once we have done that, and in doing that, we'll have something to talk about with North Korea that maybe they'll actually talk to us about. When I talk to leaders in the White House and on the National Security Council on Capitol Hill and in the State Department, they all lament the fact that we have almost no official contact with North Korea. That's because we don't have anything to talk about that they want to talk about and we want to talk about. Well, maybe we can talk about resolving this 73-year-old conflict. Okay? And once we do that and work our way through making peace, only then can we truly address denuclearization, still a necessary priority, and that's an understatement, and work to a changed paradigm where we can effectively address human rights. Because shouting about either the nuclear provocations of North Korea or their human rights record is doing nothing. So I believe we should maintain a strong deterrence posture with a little less bluster, the old walk softly and carry a big stick approach as opposed to shout at the top of your lungs. And we should continue to engage on human rights and lament the lamentable. But let's make peace, be ready to make peace, and seize the opportunity when it's there. If we're going to reduce the most critical, the most urgent, the most likely threat of nuclear war on our little planet. So that's what I think. Let me know what you think in the comments. Please tune in again to Figments 2.0. Aloha.